For most of us, our knowledge of the Mafia begins and ends with Hollywood. From The Godfather to Goodfellas to The Sopranos. There's a sort of romantic allure around the Mafia. Made men who scrapped their way from nothing into a long line of dons and crime families. It's all about the money, the power, and a somewhat paradoxical code of honor. But the real story of the Mafia is much more intricate. A painting with colors of violence, loyalty, and a sprinkling of bootlegging on top. It stretches back centuries and crosses continents, from the sun-baked hills of Sicily to the bustling streets of New York City. So, today we're taking our seat at the table with the history of the five families, the real-life story of The Godfather. But before we get buried under too many names and families, make sure you've subscribed to the Weird History channel. After that, leave us a comment and let us know what other crime families you want to hear about. Okay, time to make you a video you can't refuse. Starting in Sicily's picturesque, olive tree-dotted lands, a group of men decided they had had enough of the local government's arrogance. They formed groups to protect their communities from those in power, which sounds really nice and noble, until you realize their protection involved coercion, extortion, and the occasional broken bone. By the mid-1800s, these groups expanded and then blended into one another to become the Sicilian Mafia. Around the same time in Naples, the Camorra crime family was stirring from the shadows of prison cells, ready to get out and join the fray of criminal activities. Fast forward a few decades, and as Italians began pouring into the United States, many made their homes in the melting pot of New York City. Neapolitans gravitated towards Brooklyn, while the Sicilians settled in Harlem and Manhattan. Inevitably, their crime ventures would cross paths and escalate into what became known as the First Mafia War. The Camorra and Sicilian factions were at one another's throats. Each traded blows until Don Pellegrino Morano of the Camaristas lured Nicholas Morello, the Sicilian leader, to a supposed peace meeting in 1916. But the ceasefire was one-sided, and Morano killed the Sicilian leader and his guard. This would inevitably fuel Morano's downfall when his own man, Ralph Daniello, turned Morano in for the murder. In the aftermath, the Sicilian Mafia became the dominant force, absorbing the scraps of the Camorra into their ranks. Amid all that chaos and violence, a man named Giuseppe Joe Masseria emerged. Masseria had been involved in crime most of his life in his native Italy. Eventually, fleeing a murder charge in Sicily, he landed in New York in 1903 and joined the notorious Morello gang, who had emerged as the city's first major crime family. Masseria's rise was nothing short of meteoric, and when Giuseppe Morello and Ignazio the Wolf Lupo were sent to prison during the 1910s, he saw an opportunity. Salvatore Toto d'Aquila, another leading figure in the Morello gang, became the self-declared boss of all bosses, or capo di tutti capi. However, Masseria was not one to be outshone. By the early 1920s, after numerous attempts on his life, Masseria had firmly established himself as Joe the Boss and earned the entirely too accurate nickname, the man who could dodge bullets. His rival D'Aquila was eliminated in 1928, with a little help from Masseria's ally, Charles Lucky Luciano. With D'Aquila out of the picture, Masseria took over as capo di tutti capi. But it turns out, getting to the top of an organized crime family is like coming in second at a pie-eating contest. Masseria just replaced one rival with another, and found himself dealing with Salvatore Maranzano, a new player in town from Sicily, who would soon turn everything on its head. Maranzano had been sent by his boss, Don Vito Ferro, to expand their influence in the United States. He set up shop in Brooklyn, built a thriving real estate and bootlegging business, and quickly amassed a loyal following among fellow Sicilians. By 1930, tensions between Maranzano and Masseria's group were sky-high, leading to the infamous Castellamarese War. This wasn't just a small scrap between neighborhood rivals. It was an all-out war for control of the Mafia's future in New York. Initially, Lucky Luciano and Vito Genovese supported Masseria, but as Maranzano gained the upper hand, they saw the writing on the wall. Luciano struck a deal with Maranzano, and on April 15, 1931, Masseria met his end at a Coney Island restaurant, leaving Maranzano to emerge victorious. With Masseria out of the picture, Maranzano called a meeting of the underworld elite, laying the groundwork for what would become La Cosa Nostra, Italian for our thing. He divided New York's organized crime into the 5 families: Bonanno, Colombo, Gambino, Genovese, and Lucchese. Each family was structured like a military unit with a boss at the top, followed by an underboss, a consigliere or trusted advisor, and a host of capos, soldiers, and associates. Maranzano's reign as capo di tutti capi was short-lived, however. Luciano, who had no intention of playing second fiddle, orchestrated Maranzano's assassination in September 1931, using hitmen borrowed from his friend Meyer Lansky. With Maranzano out of the way, Luciano abolished the title of boss of all bosses and established the Commission, a governing body to oversee the Mafia's operations across the United States. This was organized crime's version of the United Nations, ensuring disputes were settled without bloodshed, as much as organized crime can be without bloodshed. With their powers consolidated, the 1930s saw the 5 families expand their criminal enterprises. Joseph Joe Bananas Bonanno, a Maranzano protege, maintained a tight grip on his family until the late 1960s. Mobsters get the best nicknames. His operations included gambling, loan sharking, and drug trafficking, with a strong emphasis on loyalty and Sicilian traditions. The Profaci family, later known as the Colombo family, was controlled by Giuseppe Joe Profaci. Lucky Luciano's own family, born from the remnants of Massaria's crew, saw Vito Genovese take the helm after Luciano was sent to prison in 1936. When Genovese fled the country in 1937, Frank the Prime Minister Costello stepped in until Luciano was deported to Italy in 1947. How did they come up with these nicknames? Was there a subcommittee? Meanwhile, Vincent Mangano led the Gambino family until his mysterious disappearance in 1951, after which Albert Anastasia, infamous for his brutal methods, took over. The Lucchese family was headed by Tommaso Tommy Galliano, a figure less flashy but no less powerful. This sort of shuffle was indicative of all the 5 families. Power ebbed and flowed like the Hudson River. Between deaths, prison sentences, or flat-out deportation, part of what was so hard to arrest or charge about the 5 families was its ever-shifting dynamic. The commission wasn't solely a New York affair either. Al Capone's Chicago outfit, notorious for its ruthless efficiency, held a seat, although Capone's tenure was cut short by a lengthy prison sentence for tax evasion. Stefano Magaddino, leader of the Buffalo crime family, also had a seat, thanks to his control over illegal trade routes to Canada. Under Luciano's vision, the National Crime Syndicate, often called the Syndicate, united Italian, Irish, Jewish, and other criminal organizations under one umbrella, stretching from coast to coast. It was less about ethnicity and more about business, a criminal utopia where everyone got their cut. The 5 families enjoyed a relative calm until the late 1950s, when things took a dramatic turn. Luciano's absence via deportation left a power vacuum in the Luciano Genovese family. Frank Costello, a savvy and diplomatic leader, maintained control until Vito Genovese returned to the U.S. in 1945 and started plotting his return to power. Genovese's ambitions led to the assassination of Costello's ally, an increasingly syphilitic Willie Moretti, in 1951. 6 years later, Genovese made a direct move against Costello, sending Vincente the Chin Gigante to kill him. Costello survived the attempt, but wisely decided to retire, leaving Genovese unchallenged. Albert Anastasia, the feared head of the Mangano family, now known as the Gambino family, also met his end in 1957, courtesy of Genovese and his own underboss Carlo Gambino. With Anastasia out of the picture, Gambino took control, marking the beginning of a new era for his family. 1957 also saw one of the most notorious events in Mafia history, the Apalachin meeting. Vito Genovese, feeling confident in his new role, organized a summit of Mafia leaders from across the country in the home of Joseph Joe the Barber Barbara in Apalachin, New York. The meeting was supposed to be a low-key affair to discuss business, but it ended in chaos when the police, acting on a tip, raided the gathering. Over 60 mobsters were arrested, and the event made headlines, blowing the lid off the Mafia's secretive operations. The 1960s saw the 5 families continue to grow their empires. However, it was also a period of significant internal strife. Joseph Bonanno's attempt to take over the commission and become capo di tutti capi led to the Banana Wars, a bloody conflict that saw Bonanno ousted and his family weakened. In other words, the Banana Wars were far less whimsical than they sound. The Colombo family, formerly the Profaci family, experienced similar turmoil when Joseph Crazy Joe Gallo rebelled against Joe Profaci's leadership, leading to a violent power struggle. The internal conflicts within the families, combined with increased law enforcement pressure, began to take a toll. By the 1970s, the five families faced increasing scrutiny from the FBI and other law enforcement agencies. The use of wiretaps, informants, and the RICO Act, which you'll remember from The Dark Knight as the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations Act, allowed authorities to bring down numerous high-ranking mobsters. Despite these setbacks, the Mafia proved resilient. Leaders like John Gotti of the Gambino family, who became a media sensation in the 1980s, continued to exert significant influence. However, by the end of the 20th century, the Mafia's power had waned considerably. The combination of relentless law enforcement pressure, internal conflicts, and changing economic landscapes made it difficult for the families to maintain their traditional grip on organized crime. Analyze this probably didn't help things either. The story of the five families is a saga of ambition, power, and violence. From their roots in the Sicilian Mafia to their rise in the New York underworld, these families have left an indelible mark on American history. While their influence has diminished, their legacy continues to fascinate. That's why we keep making movies about them. So what do you think? What would your gangster nickname be? Let us know in the comments below. And while you're at it, check out some of these other videos from our weird history.